Most rules only matter when things are stable. But there is one rule that only works when everything starts breaking, and almost no one uses it until it's too late. Before we continue, leave a comment below telling us which city and country you're watching from. We're building a global community of people who think differently about what's coming, and we want to know where you are. And if this is your first time here, subscribe now because the patterns we're tracking don't show up in mainstream analysis, and the next few videos will show you exactly why that matters. Now, there's something you need to understand about the families and individuals who remain powerful through every collapse, every transition, every moment when the old system stops working and the new one hasn't begun. They all follow the same rule, and the rule makes no sense until the ground starts shifting. That's why most people never learn it. They dismiss it when times are good. They mock it when everything feels stable, and by the time they realize why it exists, the window has already closed. This rule doesn't come from economics textbooks. It doesn't appear in business school case studies. You won't find it written down in any official policy document. But if you study the behavior of those who survived the fall of Rome, the collapse of the Weimar Republic, the restructuring of entire monetary systems, you'll see the same pattern, the same decision, the same instinct, and it's always made early, long before the majority even admits there's a problem. Here's what makes this rule so dangerous to ignore. It only becomes visible in retrospect. When you look back at a crisis, you can see exactly who understood it and who didn't. The families who acted on it preserved their position. The ones who ignored it lost everything, even if they were smarter, richer, or more connected. Because intelligence doesn't protect you during a transition. Wealth doesn't protect you. Connections don't protect you. Only this rule does. And the rule requires you to do something that feels unnecessary, right up until the moment it becomes impossible. Let's go back to a moment most people have heard about but few truly understand. The 1920s in Germany. Before hyperinflation destroyed the currency, there were early signs. Prices started moving faster than usual. The government began printing more money to cover debts. Nothing catastrophic yet. Nothing that screamed emergency. Just small distortions, barely noticeable unless you were paying attention. And here's what happened. A small group of families started converting paper wealth into physical assets. Land, businesses, tangible goods. They didn't do this because they knew exactly what was coming. They did it because they understood the rule. They understood that when systems become unstable, the things that feel safest are often the most dangerous. And the things that feel unnecessary are often the only real protection. The majority did nothing. They kept their wealth in bank accounts, in bonds, in the currency itself, because that's what made sense. That's what everyone else was doing. That's what the experts recommended. And within 2 years, all of it was worthless. A lifetime of savings gone. Entire fortunes evaporated. But the families who had followed the rule, they were fine. Not because they were lucky, because they had made a decision that looked irrational at the time, but became the only rational choice in hindsight. Now here's the part that should concern you. This pattern repeats. It doesn't matter what century you're looking at. It doesn't matter what country. It doesn't matter what kind of crisis. The rule stays the same, and the people who survive are always the ones who acted early. Not at the peak of the crisis, not when everyone else was panicking, but in that quiet moment before, when taking action still felt optional. You can see this in the late Roman Empire. As the currency was debased and the economy destabilized, certain families began moving their wealth out of the monetary system entirely. They bought land in distant provinces. They diversified their holdings across regions. They stopped relying on the mechanisms that had worked for generations. And when Rome finally collapsed, those families retained power while the old aristocracy disappeared. The rule protected them, not their title, not their legacy, not their name, just the rule. You can see it again in the 1970s. As inflation began to rise and confidence in the dollar started to crack, a small percentage of people made a move that looked extreme at the time. They shifted into hard assets: gold, real estate, commodities, They didn't wait for official confirmation that the system was breaking. They didn't wait for consensus. They acted while everyone else was still debating whether there was even a problem. And by the time the majority realized what was happening, the opportunity to protect themselves had already passed. What's interesting is not just that the rule works. It's that the rule is always dismissed by the majority, until it's too late. There's a psychological barrier that prevents most people from using it. Because the rule requires you to act on a possibility rather than a certainty. It requires you to make a move that looks unnecessary, uncomfortable, even paranoid to those around you. And human beings are wired to avoid that kind of social discomfort. We'd rather be wrong with the crowd than right alone. We'd rather lose everything than look foolish in front of our peers. And that's exactly why the rule works. Because the people who follow it are willing to endure that discomfort. They're willing to be early. They're willing to look strange. And that's what separates them from everyone else. Here's what the rule actually is. When you sense that the foundational systems around you are becoming unreliable, you move your dependencies away from those systems before the majority does. You don't wait for proof. You don't wait for permission. You don't wait for validation. You act on the pattern. Because by the time there's proof, the exit is crowded. By the time there's permission, the opportunity is gone. By the time there's validation, you're already trapped. This is not about predicting the future. This is about understanding how systems fail. They don't fail all at once, they fail slowly, then quickly. And there's always a window between the slow part and the quick part. A window where action is still possible, where you can still move, where you can still reposition. But that window doesn't stay open. And once it closes, you're stuck with whatever position you were in when the speed changed. The families who understand this don't try to time the collapse. They don't try to predict the exact day or month or year when everything breaks. They just recognize the pattern, and they act, because they know that being 6 months early costs almost nothing, but being 6 days late costs everything. That asymmetry is what drives their decision-making, not fear, not greed, just a clear-eyed understanding of how transitions work. And here's what makes this even more important right now. We are living through a period where the signals are appearing again. You can see them if you know where to look. The same early distortions, the same quiet shifts, the same behaviors among those who understand the rule. They're not panicking. They're not sounding alarms. They're just moving, quietly, methodically, repositioning their dependencies away from the systems that might not hold. And the majority? They're doing what the majority always does, ignoring it, dismissing it, waiting for proof that will only arrive after the window is closed. This doesn't mean you need to abandon everything. It doesn't mean you need to run to the hills and live off the grid. That's not what the rule requires. The rule requires something much simpler and much harder. It requires you to reduce your reliance on systems you cannot control. It requires you to build optionality before you need it. It requires you to make decisions now that feel unnecessary, but create freedom later. And most people won't do that. Because it feels like overreacting. It feels like giving up something certain for something uncertain. And that's exactly why it works for the few who do it. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice. Because the rule isn't abstract. It's behavioral. It's about where you keep your wealth, where you live, what skills you have, what relationships you maintain, what dependencies you eliminate. The people who follow the rule ask themselves a simple question. If the systems I rely on today stopped working tomorrow, what would I still have? And then they make sure the answer to that question is something real. Something that doesn't depend on promises. Something that doesn't depend on institutions. Something that doesn't depend on the continuation of the current order. This is what separates those who preserve power from those who lose it. Not intelligence, not hard work, not even wealth. Just the willingness to act on a pattern that most people refuse to see until it's too late. And the tragedy is that the information is available. The history is documented. The pattern is clear. But clarity doesn't drive action. Discomfort does. And most people would rather stay comfortable and lose than become uncomfortable and win. There's a moment in every systemic transition where two groups emerge, those who moved early and those who didn't. And the difference between them isn't luck. It's not timing, it's not access to secret information. It's just the willingness to follow the rule when following the rule still felt optional. Because that's the only time the rule works. When it's optional. Once it's mandatory, it's already too late. Think about the merchants who left Venice before its decline. They saw the trade routes shifting. They saw new powers emerging. They saw the signs that the golden age was ending. And they moved. Not dramatically. Not publicly. They just quietly relocated their operations to Amsterdam, to London, to the cities that would become the new centers of power. Meanwhile, the families who stayed in Venice kept believing that tradition and history would protect them, that their name would matter, that the old system would recover. And they were wrong. Within a generation, the wealth and influence they had accumulated over centuries was gone. The merchants who moved early, they became the new elite in the new centers, same families, different cities. Because they understood that systems don't owe you continuity just because you were successful under the old rules. This is the part that's hardest for people to accept, that the institutions you trust, the mechanisms you depend on, the structures that have worked your entire life, they're not permanent, they're not guaranteed, they're just arrangements that work until they don't, and when they stop working, they don't give you a warning. They don't send you a letter saying you have 6 months to adjust, they just stop. And everyone who was depending on them is suddenly exposed. Look at what happened to the British aristocracy after World War I. Families that had held land and power for centuries found themselves unable to maintain their estates. The tax system changed, the economic model changed, the social contract changed, and the families who thought their position was permanent discovered it wasn't. But some of them had diversified. Some of them had moved assets abroad. Some of them had developed skills and relationships that didn't depend on the old system. Those families survived. The ones who believed their status alone would protect them, they lost everything. The rule doesn't care about your status, it doesn't care about your credentials, it doesn't care about your resume or your reputation or how successful you were under the old system. The rule only cares about one thing. Did you reduce your dependencies before the system changed? Because if you did, you have options. And if you didn't, you're at the mercy of whatever comes next. Here's what most people don't realize. The rule isn't activated by the crisis itself. It's activated by your willingness to see the pattern before the crisis becomes obvious. And that's the critical distinction. Anyone can see a crisis once it's happening. That takes no skill, no insight, no courage. The real question is whether you can see the conditions that precede the crisis, whether you can recognize the early stages, whether you can act while everyone around you is still saying everything is fine. This is where cognitive bias becomes your greatest enemy. Because humans are wired for normalcy bias. We assume that tomorrow will look like today, that next year will look like this year, that the systems we depend on will continue to function because they've always functioned. And most of the time, that assumption is correct. But when it's wrong, it's catastrophically wrong. And by the time you realize the assumption was wrong, you've already missed the window to protect yourself. The families who survive transitions don't fight this bias by being smarter. They fight it by having a different relationship with uncertainty. They don't need certainty to act. They don't need everyone else to agree with them. They don't need official validation. They just need a pattern. And once they see the pattern, they move. Not because they're sure, but because they understand that the cost of being wrong is manageable while the cost of being late is not. Let me give you another example. The flight of capital from Cuba in the late 1950s. Most of the wealthy families in Havana didn't believe the revolution would succeed. They thought it was a passing disturbance. They thought the Americans would intervene. They thought their wealth and connections would protect them. And they were wrong. But a small percentage of families saw the pattern. They saw the instability. They saw the momentum shifting. And they quietly moved their assets out of the country. Not because they knew what would happen, but because they recognized that the risk of staying had fundamentally changed. Those families retained their wealth. The ones who stayed lost everything. Same starting point, different ending. And the only difference was the willingness to follow the rule. What's particularly interesting about that example is that the families who moved early were criticized at the time. They were called cowards, traitors, paranoid, because they were acting on a possibility that most people dismissed. And that social pressure is real. It's one of the main reasons people don't follow the rule. Because following the rule means being willing to be wrong in public, being willing to look foolish, being willing to act against consensus. And most people can't do that. They'd rather be right with the crowd, even if being right with the crowd means losing everything. The rule demands a different kind of courage. Not the courage to take big risks, but the courage to look strange, to be early, to act on incomplete information, to endure the discomfort of being out of sync with everyone around you. And that's not a skill you can learn from a book. It's a psychological capacity that you either have or you don't. But if you have it, if you can tolerate that discomfort, then you have access to a form of protection that's invisible to everyone else. You're watching this right now, which means you're at least open to the idea that the patterns matter, that the behaviors of those who survive transitions might be worth studying, that the rule might be real even if it feels unnecessary right now. And that puts you ahead of the majority. But awareness alone doesn't protect you. Only action does. And the action required is simple. Reduce dependence, build optionality, move early. Don't wait for consensus. Don't wait for proof. Don't wait for permission. Because history has shown us over and over that the people who wait are the ones who lose. Not because they were stupid, not because they were unlucky, but because they ignored the rule. They ignored it when it mattered. They ignored it when they still had time. And by the time they understood why the rule existed, the systems they depended on were already gone. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. Not next month, not next year. Right now. If the stability you're experiencing today is temporary, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to follow the rule while it's still optional? Or are you going to wait until everyone else realizes it was never optional at all? Because the window is always smaller than you think, and it closes faster than you expect. And once it closes, the only thing left is regret. The rule doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care about your intelligence. It doesn't care about your wealth. It only rewards those who act, and it punishes everyone else.